Welcome to the Stories Told podcast. This is episode 84, Wizarding with Heart. This is the Stories Told podcast. Two authors talking about stories in movies, TV, and of course, books.
I'm Michael Grayford. I write action-adventure stories in fantasy and sci-fi worlds, sometimes for younger readers and sometimes for adults. And I try to always inject at least a little bit of humor.
And I am author E.W. Barnes, and I write action-adventure, time travel novels, and space opera science fiction. Thousands of years, thousands of worlds. But be forewarned, beyond here, there will be spoilers. Are you ready for the adventure? Let's begin. Welcome back to the Stories Told podcast. I'm author E.W. Barnes, and with me is author Michael Grayford. And today we're talking about the story told in the film Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. How are you doing today, Mike?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. And what's new in your writing world?
Nothing new. Same thing. Still working on edits for Tales of Zora 2 and uploading episodes to Kindle Vella. That's it. What about you?
I have got new words in on Meridian, which is the third book of the Adventures of the Empyrean Guard. Still working on saving that space station from falling out of orbit. And I've also been working on a promotion. I don't know if you're in this promotion or not, but there is a promotion. It starts on Friday of this week, which unfortunately our listeners will be too late when this comes out. So never mind. However, no. I'm going to go ahead and finish. This is a promotion where I put one of my books for free. In this case, it's the first in my time travel series for free on Amazon, and put it in with a whole bunch of other authors. There are over 300 books in this promotion, all sorts of science fiction and fantasy stories. So people who actually get my newsletter or follow me on my social media will get notification of this promotion. So even though this podcast will come out too late for people to take part in this promotion, by signing up for my newsletter or following me on social media, including on YouTube, I post notices in the community where they have little posts available. I'll post notices of these promotions in that community area, so people can take advantage of these promotions, get the books for free. And I think you're doing a promotion too, yes?
Yeah, I'm in the IASFA fantasy promo, which is also going to be done by the time this podcast airs. It'll be going from the 22nd through the 26th, I believe.
So the IASFA, for our listeners, is the International Association of Science Fiction and Fantasy Authors. They run free promos every month. And what happens is anybody who's interested in getting notification of these promos just needs to sign up for the IASFA newsletter. I also include the link for that newsletter in my newsletter, and I think you do the same thing in your newsletter.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Not every month, but every 2 or 3 months I usually put a note in there.
Yeah, I will put it in every month because I figure there's a lot of overlap for readers in what kinds of science fiction they like to read, what kind of fantasy they like to read. So if they find something cool and fun by getting these promos every month, I think that's awesome. So for our listeners who are interested in tapping into these promo opportunities, the IASFA does promos every month. And both Mike and I put notices about those promos into our newsletters. So signing up for our newsletters will get you that information. And this other promo, Book Blast promo, that I have my science fiction story in, my time travel story in, that comes out quarterly. And again, I put notice of that into my newsletters. So signing up for our newsletters, following us on social media, you can get notifications of when these books are free. And that's always a good thing. So what interesting stories have you come across lately in books, movies, or television?
Not much. I was watching anime called One Punch Man. Have you heard of that?
Okay. No.
It's basically this guy, he's really strong, and he can defeat opponents with one punch. And there's monsters in this world, and there's this association of heroes with different ranks, and they fight the monsters, and he always just, takes them out in one hit. So it seems kind of stupid, right? Like, okay, he just kills everybody in one hit or defeats them in one hit. But it's more about the characters around him. Like, he takes on a student who's, sees him as a mentor and is trying to learn and become better, and the other heroes that are going on, more so than just about him fighting people, because obviously that would be pointless. You would just beat him in one punch. Anyway, it's a silly show, but it's kind of fun. So that's what I've been watching. And then I've been slowly working my way through the second Fablehaven book. That's it.
Oh, how are you liking it?
I'm enjoying it. I think it
Good.
it kicks into gear a little bit more quickly than the first one did, but it's still similar in tone and style.
Okay. My offspring started reading the series again after I read the first book. So
Oh, okay.
it's nice to see that was an inspiration for a reread. I think that's
Yeah,
cool.
that's good.
So I have been continuing to watch Rings of Power. This season is so much better. There's a lot more suspense. And even though, you know what's going to happen, I think this season they're doing a much better job of weaving the storylines in a way that you care about what's happening to the characters. You are anticipating what's going to happen next. It's the dynamic between Celebrimbor, who is the elven crafter of all the great rings, and Anatar, who we know is Sauron in disguise, is amazing. Those two actors are blowing it out of the water. It's just so good. It's creepy. It's believable. It's disturbing. It's very well done. So I'm actually very impressed with this season. I think they've taken some of the feedback to heart and really tried to up their game in how they're presenting this story.
Very cool. And we'll be discussing that at some point, right?
Yeah, I think it's the end of October, early November. We're going to be talking about both season 1 and season 2.
Okay.
But that will come after Potober.
Yeah.
When we talk about all those wonderful works of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yep.
Are you ready to talk about Harry Potter?
Sure, let's go.
Today we're talking about the movie Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And I will read the summary that comes up on Google when you type in Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a boy who learns on his 11th birthday that he is the orphaned son of 2 powerful wizards and possesses unique magical powers of his own. He is summoned from his life as an unwanted child to become a student at Hogwarts, an English boarding school for wizards. There he meets several friends who become his closest allies and help him discover the truth about his parents' mysterious deaths. Did you like this movie?
I'm very mixed on this movie. When I first saw it, it was when it was when it originally released in the theaters, and I hadn't read any of the books. I didn't really know anything about it, and I was not very impressed at all. It felt, watching it, like it was a lot of pandering to people who read the book and showing things that weren't necessarily interesting to people who hadn't and weren't familiar with the world, rather than just telling a compelling story. A lot of it felt derivative to me, a bit like Halloween fantasy. I think we mentioned that before, with the witches, with the stereotypical witch hats and ghosts buzzing around the castle and flying on magic brooms and using magic wands, trolls, goblins, centaurs, 3-headed dog. Like, all these things are like very familiar in mythology, lore, and sort of Halloween-y world. So I wasn't that impressed when I first saw it. I didn't think the story was particularly engaging. It just wasn't my kind of thing. It felt very much aimed at younger children and readers of the books. Now, I have subsequently read all of the books and watched all of the movies because, when I got into a writing group, they're like, you really need to know this story. So I went through the whole thing, and I have a much, much greater appreciation for it now. And I think, I think generally I'm positive on it, I would say. I still think it's not a great story, this first story, but it's cool. there are a lot of good things in it. There's, we talked about before this sense of magical stuff, magical things and places hidden in the real world. I like that idea. We talked about that with Fablehaven, and I think it's good. I think Harry Potter, did that well. I like the character. I love that Harry Potter has this notoriety in this magical world, but he knows nothing about it. I think that's a really cool idea. The story does a very good job of making us feel for Harry at the start, right? Putting him in circumstances where, he's basically bullied by his family around him. And as far as we can tell, he doesn't have any friends. So he's just stuck with these horrible people treating him badly. So we care about him. And we see that, he has the makings of a decent person despite that upbringing. And then, it allows us to root for him later in the story. And it also sets up Snape as a good villain, because we see Snape also treating him unfairly right from the get-go, asking him questions about magic and the magic world, which, how would he know these things? This is literally his first day of school in this magic world, right? So we feel like it's unfair the way he's being treated, and it makes us, again, root for Harry and root against Snape. So I think that setup is done really well. And there's a lot of little nice touches in there. The Diagon Alley is fun, and the Goblin Vaults in these caves under the city was really cool. One thing I like about this story that very, very few other stories do is the first act turn. The transition from the character's normal world into their other world that they're going to go into in the bulk of the story. In this case, is a positive one. Usually, it's something negative that happens that kicks the character out of their normal world, right? Like in Star Wars, Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru are killed, right? And that's a very, very common thing. Someone dies or some awful thing happens, and the character's forced to go in this other direction. And here it's a positive one. It's like, hey, Harry, you're a wizard. You get to go to wizarding school. So I will say that's a nice change. There's very few stories that do that. The other one that I always think of is Charlie on the Chocolate Factory.
Oh, yeah.
He gets the golden ticket, and he gets to go to this cool magical place as well. So it's kind of a similar thing like that. So it's always nice to see those versus just always being a negative change. So I thought that was cool. I like that Harry Potter has a lot of gumption, and he does the right thing despite consequences. You see that more in subsequent stories, obviously, with him. But we certainly see the beginning of that in his character development here. And we get to see friendships forming with Hermione and Ron. And that felt very good. It felt very realistic, the way that kids would interact. We see rivalries forming. So I think that setup is very good. And then as far as Harry at school, we see him struggling with spells and things like that. But then we get to see him be good at least at one thing with broom control and flying. So that's nice. He's not just, poor at everything. We get to see him also have some skill. We see with the mirror of Erised, right? Most people's deepest desires, it's something very selfish. And here it's like he wishes his parents were there. It's like that's something that we can relate to. And again, it sets his character for the series in a good way.
Yeah.
I like how they pay off a lot of the setups toward the end. With Hermione, she's reading all the time and studying, and then her studying about herbology paid off, and then Ron's knowledge of chess, and then the mirror comes back into play. So I like how those things all come back in together at the end. And I also like the reveal of Quirrell, how do you say his name? Quirrell? Squirrel, we'll call him.
Squirrel with it out the S. Squirrel.
Yeah. As the bad guy, I mean, you kind of get little glimpses of it throughout the story, which, if you don't know anything about the story and you're watching it the first time, you probably won't notice that. You'll be focused more on Snape. They did a good job of setting that up. Then, of course, Voldemort as being attached to him, which was really creepy. And I think one of the things this story has that a lot of people latched on to was the heart. It's really as much about the main characters and their friendships and the rivalries as it is about the plot, I think. And I feel like maybe this if you looked at it through today's lens of genres and subgenres of fantasy, it probably would fit into cozy fantasy because
Oh, I
there's
like that.
so much of it early on, right? There's no stakes. Like, I'll get to this one, what you could improve, but early on, it's like he's just exploring this world. He gets to go in this fantasy land. He's picking out his magic wand. He gets to choose his pet. He meets his friends. They're going through school, right? It's just like sort of like just enjoying this world that they're in. And there's very low stakes until you learn what's going on. And even then, it's not like super, super high stakes because we haven't really, revealed the plot of the overarching series. So maybe that's part of the attraction is this was sort of like an early cozy fantasy before that became a thing. And maybe
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that I didn't latch onto it because that's not really my jam. I want plot and get the story going and tension and all that stuff. But overall, I would say I enjoyed it a lot more watching it again. I think once you've seen the world and see where it goes, and it's kind of just like eases you back into the Harry Potter universe after you're already familiar with it. So I get the appeal from the readers of the book seeing this first movie, even though it didn't really grab me the first time I watched it. Anyway, enough rambling. What about you? What do you like about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer / Philosopher's Stone?
Well, unlike you, I had read as far as was possible when this was released, which was 2001. So I don't know which book we were on at that time, but I had read the books. And so I was delighted to see the movie and was delighted on how close the movie was to the book because it was actually very close to the book. That being said, little foreshadowing here, there are some things that I would have changed as a writer. But what I liked was, and I have to admit, like you, I came back to this movie after seeing the whole series, reading the whole series, pondering the series to some degree as a writer already. And so this viewing was very much colored by all of that information that I have accumulated over the last 20 plus years. 25 years? Is that right? Ooh.
Yeah, probably if you read the book when it came out.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So there we go. One of the things that I noticed at the start, or a couple of things that I appreciate in this story and in the movie, is that, Dumbledore is presented. He is the first person we encounter when this movie starts. And we see him with his Deluminator making the lights go out on Privet Drive. And he exudes this air of power and mystery. And then we don't see him again until, halfway through the film? Maybe more?
Yeah, that's true.
I didn't even check to see what the time stamp was when we finally see him again. And we don't even hear from him again until well after half. We don't hear from him until he confronts Harry at the Mirror of Erised. So I thought that was fascinating because we have several mysteries that are laid out right for us, right at the very beginning. Why is this child being left on the doorstep? What happened to his parents? What's going on? Who are these terrible muggles? Who are these powerful witches that are involved here, leaving this child on the doorstep? And this very powerful character, who is the first one we meet in the story, then vanishes for a very long period of time. The other thing that I really love is that in addition to the things that you talked about, like the world building, I love that cozy fantasy framework that you were talking about. I'm a fan of the cozy fantasy piece. One of my siblings wanted to start reading The Lord of the Rings recently because they were looking for the cozy fantasy part of being in the Shire, which is another example of that great, comfortable, cozy, fantastical world that was built that feels so good to sort of sink into. Unfortunately, the badness happens pretty quickly.
Yeah.
But in this story, it actually doesn't happen that quickly. It's annoying. You see, Draco Malfoy is bullying, but how's that different than Dudley? And you see Snape's bullying, but how's that different than the Dursleys? So you get to really sink into it. I think that was a point very well made, what you just said. But one of the things I really love is that this story is set up so that the magical world feels very real, and the Muggle world with the Dursleys feels like caricatures. And watching this movie again, I really see how the Dursleys' behaviors are very caricature in style. Even the acting was, I'm certain, purposely done in a way that is two-dimensional and caricature and overblown as compared to the acting when he finally enters the magical world, which is three-dimensional and rich and nuanced. I think that's absolutely fascinating how they did that. And I'm not sure that I picked that up in the reading of the story as clearly as I pick it up in the movie. And that probably has to do with just the difference in the medium, the visual versus the reading. The other thing that I really enjoy is that the world that J.K. Rowling has created is very much a mirror. The Muggle world and the magical world are mirrors for Harry. It kind of reminds me a little bit of the mirroring we saw in The Mummy, where you have the good characters and the bad characters sort of mirroring each other. You get something very similar here in this story. You've got, Mr. and Mrs. Dursley and Dudley on the Muggle side, and you've got Dumbledore and McGonagall, and to some degree Draco Malfoy, or the mirror version of that would be Ron and Hermione.
Ron, yeah.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, and you get to see that, and it spreads out a little bit, and there is mirrored characters throughout, and it's not 100%, but you can definitely, when you read the series, kind of see that happening, and I think that's really cleverly done, very well done. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I have some very similar notes to what you said about, again, the world building is just really brilliant, very in-depth, lots of time spent on that, lots of thought to make it immersive and believable feeling. I think that the characters in the magical world, the friendships, are incredibly believable, including right down to, teasing Hermione and essentially losing her friendship over a rude comment made, only to go back and gain it again through their own bravery. That's very realistic as far as friendships are developed. So I really appreciated that. So there's lots here to enjoy. And I think for me, it's an overwhelming pleasure to watch the movie. This is, one of my favorite movies to go back to on a regular basis. But now that we've talked about what's good and fun about it, is there anything that you might have changed?
Before I go into that, I just want to say this isn't a story comment, but I do think the casting was very good for this movie.
Yeah.
Especially for the kids, because it's always hard with kids if they're going to be able to pull it off. I thought Harry was great. I thought Ron was great. All the kids I thought were really good. They really brought those characters to life. Hermione's expressions and Ron's, the way they interacted, they pulled it off very well, I think. What would I improve? One thing I noted, I don't know that I would necessarily change this, but it did stand out to me with Harry being in the situation he was in, living under the stairs, being bullied not only by his cousin, but by aunt and uncle as well, and having no friends. There's no way that kid would be so well adjusted. he would be a mess. But then that wouldn't be an interesting story to tell. At least not a fun, heartwarming story like the one that they were trying to tell. So one thing that also stood out to me is, why wouldn't the Dursleys have been thrilled to get rid of Harry? Like when the letters came in, it's like, okay, good. They didn't seem to like him. They didn't seem to enjoy having him around. So wouldn't they have been happy to have him out of their hair for a while? That was something I didn't understand. But again, I guess it doesn't set it up quite the same way. I'm not sure that I would change that either. It's just also something that seemed strange. I think maybe that's part of the whole thing. The whole setup with the Dursleys, maybe it's like you said, it was so extreme and over the top and not really believable. But it does set a certain tone for the story and help launch us into the magical world, where it's like, oh, we'd much rather Harry be in this magical world than with them. So I don't mind it being necessarily that over the top. And it wasn't something that really bothered me. It's just, I thought it was kind of funny. The biggest thing for me in this story that I would change is kind of what I mentioned before, where this feels sort of like a cozy fantasy. It just feels like there's a severe lack of narrative drive. Nothing really happens for like an hour into this movie that gives us a sense of like conflict, of like what the conflict of the story is and what the plot of the story is. He goes in the magic world, they're walking around the palace, they're figuring things out, they're going to classes. Like, okay, but what is the story about? It takes so long. I think that's one of the reasons it lost me the first time I saw it. It's just like, what is this movie about? It's literally like over an hour before we really get a hint of like, oh, okay, here's the conflict of the story. So I just would have shortened that. I don't think we needed all of that setup, all of the little world building touches. They really did feel like service to people who had read the book versus trying to pull people in who hadn't read the books and just wanted to watch the movie. So I would have tightened that personally. You could have mixed that stuff in throughout and even saved some for, the next movie. The other thing was the end of the story. It fell flat for me. When I first watched, I was like, okay, so Harry just had the stone in his pocket. Like that's the solution here. And then it gets explained later, like, oh, Dumbledore has to tell you basically what happened. I don't really like that storytelling technique. Like, hey, you got lucky. Now we're going to explain why you got lucky. Like, I don't like that. And then also there's we'd seen the mirror before, right? But it was just kind of this dream thing of like, what is your deepest desire? And it's like, was his deepest desire really to have the stone at that moment? Or was it to protect the stone? And then we'd never seen any kind of hint of objects being able to go in and out of the mirror somehow. That's a cool idea, but there was no setup for that. So I might have put some kind of setup for that earlier on and not so explicitly stated, this is what the mirror does, and people suffer these ill effects from it. And then you kind of changed that at the end. So I didn't like that. It felt kind of like a cool idea that she had and then didn't fully set it up. And then also, Harry just happened to have the ability to turn the bad guy to stone or to ash or whatever. Like, because his mother died for him? That was just so lame. The power of love burned the guy to ash. Nah, I'm not buying that. It doesn't make any sense in the context of the world you set up. It should have been some kind of active action that Harry had to take, or something at least that he was aware of, or that he learned ahead of time, that he could have used, even some action that he could have taken, as opposed to just, oh, I touched the guy because he's coming after me. I didn't buy any of that. And yeah, I'm just not a fan of the hero lucking out to win the day. That didn't sit well with me. I think both the concept of using the mirror to transfer items and this concept that there was something inherently magical into him that could affect someone else. I think both those ideas were cool, but they just came out of the blue and then had to be explained afterwards. That was weak to me. So those are the things that I would change. What do you have on your improve list?
Well, first of all, I think those are great observations. I guess I never really questioned the way that Harry got the stone and defeated Quirrell. And I think you make a really great point that it would have been a lot more satisfying if it had been related to things that he had learned while he was at Hogwarts. I think that it wasn't unsatisfying to read it the way it is, but I think you're right. It would have been more satisfying for me as a rule to have it been things that he learned. So yeah, those are good points. So I had two notes. The first one was there's the whole series of scenes related to Hagrid getting a dragon and then them getting caught and then them having to go into the dark forest as punishment. Those felt, for the most part, I think the writing is really smooth, and I think the setups and the payoffs and the links in the chain make a lot of sense, except for there. There, it felt like it was the plot driving the action rather than the character's behavior driving the action. It's sort of just sort of came out of left field and was designed to get them into the dark forest. That was all that those scenes were for. So that kind of wasn't as smooth as the rest of the story. And I think I would have liked to have more Dumbledore. Dumbledore serves as the wizard, the wise one who offers advice. And yes, he shows up around the Mirror of Erised and says, doesn't pay to dwell on dreams. But I think I would have liked to have seen him more with a little bit more of the wisdom. And even now, thinking about it in terms of the comments that you made, what if it was something that Dumbledore said to him that would help him defeat Quirrell? You know, that lesson learned that he got directly from Dumbledore that he used in the final battle with Quirrell. I think that would have been a really cool connection.
Yeah, that would have made sense.
So did you devise any themes from Harry Potter?
I think there's a number of things in this story. They certainly kind of hammer you over the head with friendship and bravery theme at the end. But I don't think that's necessarily all that it is. I think there's a theme of defeating villainy requires standing up against it despite the consequences. That's what we see the three of them do. And then Harry in particular at the end, he's like, no, I'm not giving this to you. Right? He knows what could potentially happen. Right? His life is potentially on the line here. But he's like, no, I'm not going to do that. So that's the theme I get looking at his climactic moment, which often, as we say, points toward the theme. And then also I would say, if I'm looking at this kind of, again, from the villain's perspective, contrasted with the hero's perspective, if you look at that climactic moment, right, Harry wants the stone but doesn't want to use it, versus the other side, which does want to use it. So I think it would be, from that perspective, a lust for power will always lead to one's downfall, if you're looking at it from Voldemort's perspective. And that's certainly
Nice.
a theme. Certainly a theme that gets carried through to the end of the series. So those are the ones that I got. What about you?
I pulled the first one that you mentioned, which was, and I reframed it a little bit differently rather than just friendship and bravery. But to me, it was a theme of having faith in oneself and one's friends. Because Harry starts off in an environment where he is always so belittled that he doesn't believe in himself. I can't be a wizard. I'm just Harry. And so throughout the course of the story, he develops faith in himself. Yeah, I can do this. And he develops faith in his friends. Whereas before he didn't have any friends, just a snake and some toy soldiers.
The snake was like, hey, we'll be your friend.
Yeah. So that's what I pulled.
All right, I like that.
What are your takeaways as a writer?
I was thinking about this. I'm going to choose something that's mostly unrelated to what we discussed, because I think there's a lot that I could say. Most of those things I thought of, you and I have mentioned before. So what I'm going with is, don't forget that the setting can also be a character in the story. I think it plays a huge part in this movie and in the book too.
Yeah.
We're just talking about movie right now.
That's a great one. Mine are the usuals. World building. I think, our comment, our comment about the cozy fantasy, that was the big draw for so many people in this story. The world building was so beautifully done. It gave people a place in which to live in their imaginations, and that is a real skill. And so that's something I would love to be able to do in my storytelling, as well as, moving the plot forward through the characters, not through plot devices, and the usual that I love, good setups and good payoffs.
Excellent. Yeah, those are good.
Thank you for joining us as we talked about the story told in the movie Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters and all our subscribers. We're so grateful for your support and your encouragement. The Stories Told podcast is available on multiple podcast platforms, and we thank you for liking and subscribing or following, depending on where you're listening. It may not be a big deal to you, but it means a lot to us. If you have a favorite book, movie, or TV series you'd like to suggest for the podcast, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, and that link is in the show notes. You can find Michael Grayford at michaelgrayford.com, and on that website you can sign up for his newsletter to get notifications of promos. And you can find E.W. Barnes at 1000years.com, also a place to sign up for the newsletter, and those links are also in the show notes. Join us next time as we start Poe-tober and discuss the works of Edgar Allan Poe, starting with the story The Pit and the Pendulum. Thanks so much, Mike. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was fun.
And we'll see you next time on the Stories Told podcast.